and welcome everyone. I'm Maureen Droney with the Recording Academy's Producers and Engineers Wing, and I am so pleased to be here today to help share and report on the amazing work of some of our P&E Wing members who are so enormously dedicated to the craft of recording music and have been willing to spend so many hours of their precious time on trying to make things better for everybody on the engineering production side of record making. It is an incredible, and I rarely use that word, but it is an incredible demonstration of the caring and passion for greatness that exists behind the scenes in our industry. So here we go. We will be taking questions, so put your questions in the Q&A, in the Zoom Q&A, and we'll answer them when it's appropriate if we want to answer you right away because we're on that part of talking about the documents, or we will also continue Q&A at the end. So here we go. And now I'm going to turn it over to our hosts, Jordan Hamlin and Glenn Lorbiecki.
Everybody.
Hey,
Glenn,
Jordan,
glad
how's
to
it
be back
going?
with you. Glad to be back. Glad to have everybody here. This is a long-awaited moment, I feel like, the completion of this document. I feel like this is such an important, craft health moment. Glad to be here with you.
I was just looking over the document myself, and I realized that we started working on this way back in the day when I was co-chair of P&E Wing with Bob Ludwig, and which was a heck of a long time ago. And it started out with, hey, do you think we should change the names of our audio tracks from Audio 1 to something more realistic in Pro Tools? And that's how it started. And oh my God, now it's a 64 whatever page document that is exhaustive and as up to the moment as it can be. Although I think the panelists will probably note that there are some formats that are in flux in this document, one of which is the Schrodinger's cat format from Sony. Sorry for the physics reference there. Without further ado, let's introduce our panelists, starting with Jeff Balding. Jeff is the chair of the Recording Academy P&E Wing Deliverables Committee. He's an engineer and producer who's brought his unique blend of commercial instincts and authenticities to a broad array of genres, earning numerous Grammy nominations and a multi-platinum professional profile. Jeff has worked with icons across genres, including Eagles, Morgan Wallen, Taylor Swift, Jelly Roll, Dan and Shay, Cody Johnson, Blake Shelton, and for something completely different, Megadeth. I'm sure there are stories, Jeff. He's also served in various Recording Academy positions, including National Trustee, President of the Recording Academy Nashville Chapter, and the Producers and Engineers Wing National Steering Committee. And it should be noted that if you look at this document, you'll see that Jeff is the one person on every single iteration of this committee since 2001. So Jeff apparently started doing this when he was like 5, when he was 5.
Also in the trenches and here with us today is Leslie Richter. Nashville-based producer and recording engineer Leslie Richter began her career as a staff engineer at the acclaimed Ocean Way Nashville studios, where she developed her ears working on countless award-winning records, also gaining experience in studio wiring, electronics decommissioning, and rebuilding large format consoles. In 2008, she joined Ben Folds' team to bring his private studio, historic RCA Studio A, back to life. Leslie continues to work as a freelance producer engineer and is an active member of the Recording Academy, serving on the Nashville Chapter Board of Governors and as co-chair of the Nashville Producers and Engineers Wing, and as a mentor in the GRAMMY Mentorship Program. An ally and advocate, Leslie supports Women's Audio Mission, Sound Girls, She Is the Music, and Change the Conversation. Her credits include Sheryl Crow, Spoon, Sarah Bareilles, Winona, John Hyatt, Casey Musgraves, Jim Lauderdale, Ben Folds, and Jesse Alexander. In addition to producing and engineering, Leslie is an educator working at Belmont University and historic Nashville studios like Quonset Hut and Columbia Studio, and is newly elected, I believe, as the Chair of Audio Engineering Technology Department at Belmont. Congrats, Leslie, and welcome.
Awesome. Next panelist, Paul Willie Green Womack. Producer, engineer, and sonic artist, Paul Willie Green Womack has built a discography boasting names such as Armand Hammer, Wiz Khalifa, The Alchemist, The Roots, Billy Woods, Elucid, and many more, and established himself as one of the top names in independent hip-hop and R&B. Currently residing in Brooklyn, New York, Womack is a member of the Recording Academy, former governor of the Audio Engineering Society, and is a professor and artist in residence at the University of St. Francis. Working from his studio, the Greenhouse Recording Company, Willie Green is a leading voice in both music creation and audio education. And I have to add, a spectacularly talented dad.
Strong. Also with us in the trenches is Matt Hennessy. Welcome, Matt. A powerhouse presence in Chicago's music scene, Matt Hennessy is a versatile producer, engineer, mixer, and dedicated studio owner, deeply entrenched in the pulse of the city's musical roots. He has worked on projects for major artists such as Jay-Z, Twista, Kanye West, DMX, Ludacris, Destiny's Child, R. Kelly, Beyonce, Rihanna, John Legend, Shakira, and many others. He spent some formative years at the helm of recording, mixing, and mastering for the legendary Traxsters label, Traxsters Inc. His role extended beyond the studio, encompassing catalog management and asset curation, preserving the essence of an era in music. In 2008, Hennessy stepped forward on his own and positioned the owner as chief engineer. Matt created an inspirational haven of sonic exploration with vintage equipment and instruments seamlessly integrated alongside contemporary tools. His studio has emerged as a creative haven for artists. Welcome, Matt.
And last but not least, our secret weapon, our surprise guest, who has been on almost every committee for the creation of this document since its inception, a man who needs no introduction, George Massenburg. Yay. Well, thanks to all of you folks for taking time out of your busy schedule to discuss this with us today. I think the best thing to do is to hand this over to Jeff Balding, the chair of the committee, and let him give us this information. And Jordan, do you have anything to add before we launch?
I think it's time to dive in.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so this document, hello, everybody. As Glenn had said, started in 2001. Some of the things that inspired it, shall I say, was as labels began to get digital deliveries in physical formats, from a data DVD with no label to a hard drive wrapped in a hotel towel. It started bringing people to the table, wanting to come up with a recommendation to try to find something where there was a uniform delivery, and not only what you're delivering, but the naming conventions and a lot of other things involved. So over the years, this has been a living document. It's grown and expanded, and these latest revisions, especially this one, was a major one. We wanted to just restructure it, look at everything again, reorganize it, and try to make it digestible, especially in universities and stuff who have started using this, as well as, you know, it's a worldwide document now. So we have to look at it from that perspective. So we're excited about this revision. A lot of hard work went into it. The people you see here were on 9 o'clock meetings every week for several months, crafting this document. Sarah Jones helped us put everything where it's readable and digestible, and had a big part in writing this and taking care of us. So we're excited about this, and let's move forward. So the 2025 document. And this is we'll have a link. We can, I don't know if we've posted it or not, but we'll post a link to this where you can download it and have a copy as well to look at. And I'm going to ask the panelists as we go through this, there's stories and there's things in personal workflows, you know, because everybody's got a little different workflow. So what we tried to do with the document is give you a place to start, a building block to build how you want to basically lay out, whether it's folder hierarchy or whatever. And we've got downloadable a folder hierarchy that you can download and customize to save you from building it out. There's some things that you'll see throughout the document here. And we really wanted to give you a good foundation for this. So we'll move on past the introduction here.
Jeff, could I read the quote? Could we go back one? And
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
George,
Yeah.
I'd love to reach. I love this quote, everyone. As studio practitioners, it is our responsibility for the future of music to ensure that the sound recordings made today are deliverable to long-term storage such that the assets are organized and accessible, accurately reflect the original works, and are ready to be archived and preserved for the indefinite future. I just wanted to set the tone there.
Yeah, that says it all, George. Definitely. All right, moving on. So, you can read here up top the 3 delivery recommendations outline best practices that provide these capabilities, the ability to recreate the final mix or repurpose the original recording in the short term with access to all of the original final mix elements. The next one, folder hierarchy structures for organizing and managing files throughout the creation and delivery process. The working folder hierarchy that you may have may vary from what the content owner that you're delivering the files from, because everybody's going to have a little different delivery process and requirement. And as well, a solution for the long-term storage and archival issues that confront content owners in their efforts to preserve and maintain their assets. So that's really kind of what we're trying to hit in these best practices. And I think, Maureen, who was it? You had a great quote. This is just a way for the next person in line, right?
Oh yeah, be considered best practices. It's just best practices are just being considerate of the next person down the supply chain, right? It doesn't. If everybody works together, things come out a lot better, a lot easier.
And the metadata, the final credits make it to the end of the chain where they belong, so you can get paid.
Super important.
So let's move on through. And there is one thing I want to highlight here about the term master. You know, as the committee recognizes that the term master can carry an offense, and while terms such as master recording or master mix have been deeply embedded into the industry for decades, we're currently collaborating with the music community at large to find an alternative to replace the terms. We felt it necessary to make sure that was in the document. Go on to the next slide. So does anybody, I want to get the panel involved here in talking about some of this. If you see something as we go through it that you want to comment on, personal experience, things that have affected you, you know, stories, all that stuff, I think it helps bring the message home. This is basically delivery of a physical media and what that is. All right. Anything else? If you guys want to highlight anything, we did touch on, since analog is still a format that does get delivered from time to time, we wanted to make sure that was in here. Does anybody want to talk about the case for upsampling in certain scenarios? Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to hit on mute. Yeah, I mean, generally we know at this point that like plugins all have upsampling built in, and you're really not going to pick up anything from turning a 48K session to a 96K session if you're mixing in the box. You're not getting anything that, above, you're not creating any new content. But there is something to be said when you are going out to analog and mixing on a console or running to tape or running to a bunch of outboard gear using extensive amounts of analog processing. and then recapturing as stems or recapturing as a final mix. So, generally we're always mixing on the console here at VSOP and using, as much outboard gear as needed at any given moment. And we do have a practice of upsampling multi-tracks that come in to high res because we're going to capture stuff off the desk and from the gear that is got some stuff up top. And we've taken the time to A/B back and forth with the non-upsampled multi-track to make sure that we weren't just fooling ourselves and looking at it on Spectral. And there definitely seems to be an advantage, to our opinion, in that scenario for upsampling a multi-track before mix. Outside of that, I don't think there is much. But in that scenario, we have found success and a reason to do it. You muted, Jeff.
Let's move on to the next page. All right, so a lot of the deliveries nowadays are using cloud services and stuff. So we wanted to touch on that. I think we have an appendix in the back, page 50 there, that has more details on this and some guidelines to what to look for and when you're looking for a cloud service and stuff. So what are the actual deliverables? We list those, and this is all stuff that's outlined in the folder hierarchy as we get to it: approved stereo mixes, approved immersive mixes, master mixes, stereo mixes, stereo stems, consolidated multi-tracks. It's important to consolidate the multi-tracks so that if somebody imports the audio into a different DAW or somewhere, it lines up. We'll get into more of the details on that later. And the metadata and documentation. This is important stuff that needs to be preserved. So anyway, let's move on. Does somebody want to talk about the file naming conventions and the characters? George, anybody?
George.
I think my audio is so bad, I'm going to let you guys deal with it until there's something that I really, really need to get in there.
Okay.
Sorry for the bad audio.
No worries. So the naming conventions, as we looked at safe characters, and this is something that we run into, and Matt can definitely chime in on this too, as emojis and different things come into artist names, song titles, things like that. It can flag, and depending on where you import stuff into, what DAWs, what systems and stuff, it can change and not accept certain characters. So what we decided to do is just make a list of safe characters that can be, for sure translated across everything. And I know these don't necessarily take in spellings in other languages, so that's a hard one with the systems and stuff. But this is after a lot of debate and a lot of discussions, this is where we ended up on that. And the naming convention you see down there at the bottom, the AI stands for artist initials, and then song title. The mixer initials is what MI stands for, and the 01 is the revision number, which I always name my Pro Tools session the same revision number as the mix when it's going here. And then whether it's a vocal up, a master, whatever it is that you're printing, and the sample rate and bit rate. So that's basic. Glenn, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. It's fantastic that you're putting this forward, that hopefully everyone can start to adhere to these guidelines. But I'm curious as to why you chose to exclude the date at the end of the file name, because ISO standard includes the date in year, month, day format. And especially if we're uploading or transferring through a cloud service, they have a tendency to overwrite the creation date.
Right.
So if you had that in the name as opposed to sample rate, for example, just curious about that.
I think one of the things that we were thinking about there was that the mix number is the thing that's the most important, not really the date that it was created on. If you know that mix number 6 is the final, having the date there seemed less important than the mix number or the date. I'm sorry. The mix number being more
You
important
know,
than the date.
it's pretty clear that some of us have always used a date, and I'm going to continue to use a date. And I think the document format, as long as you stick to the basics, will allow
Yeah.
certain variation in what you choose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say,
No, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
I was going to say consistency for me is the key here. Whatever you do, that practice, you want to continue to do it. I'm going through the tedious process of archiving a bunch of old drives and old sessions. 5 years ago, I labeled sessions a certain way or files a certain way. 10 years ago was a different way. And now I'm finding myself wondering what I was doing then. But if I can create a repeatable, consistent way to do things, then I'll always understand instead of going back 15 years and something is labeled audio 27 and I'm sunk because I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as I mentioned earlier, these are basic building blocks and they are customizable, but this is definitely the information that we felt was needed to be within the naming convention. And there's a lot like the date and stuff that can be added if you need. The other side of it is not making the name so long that is confusing as well. So a lot of thought and debate went into
Yeah.
the creation
I
of
want
it.
to I want to dip back to the safe characters thing real quick, Jeff, while we're here. I get a lot of song names and artist names that have weird characters, dollar signs, ampersands. And when we started this process, it was, it was just that. But now it's emojis as well, and emojis on track names and stuff like that. And while that might seem like something fun to do at a time, and I was hoping that it wasn't going to be a big deal. I recently had a Pro Tools session that wouldn't open because there were tracks with a star in it, and it just wouldn't open. It crashed every single time it found that audio file. I've had other sessions where that's not a problem, and I'm sure people in the chat can be like, "Oh, I use that symbol all the time." Yeah, sure, until it doesn't. The day it doesn't work, and this session in particular just would not open until I took that track out, and then of course it opened and operated fine, and then we renamed it and were able to re-import it as raw audio, and that solved the problem. But it literally was just that one asterisk. So these are good practices that you can take up that maybe might seem like it doesn't really affect your workflow until the day that it really either saves you from getting bit or or you get bit. Same with the date thing. Like, I never really thought it was a big deal. I was fine with the way this ended with the sample rate bit depth, but now we're working on a NAS array for most of our audio, and some applications, when you open it or even look at it, even if you don't save it, it changes the modified and create date and it stomps on it. And the only way to avoid that is locking it first. And like, it's a lot of extra steps just to preserve a date. So even though for 10 years I've never included the date, we are discussing whether we should start to include the date. But again, I think this is a minimum data set here.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Let's move on to the next page. And I won't go through all this. The naming convention, as you can see, for stereo mixes is pretty basically the same. We tried to keep consistency throughout the document on the naming conventions as much as possible. Next page. Now, in these sections coming up, as in this one, we added sections called considerations. And these are things to look at to make you think about things that maybe you might not think about in the heat of the moment, and just to give you a good foundation when doing these things. Does anybody want to comment on this? I want to make sure we get through the document too. So let's go to the next page. And the same thing here, what we've added to the file naming convention on this is the track order for an album. So that's what the 01 is for. Next. So this is one that we felt was really important. This was added a revision or two back, maybe a couple of revisions back. We started adding this because when you're printing stems, especially now that stems are really important and used fairly often in immersive mixing, how well the stems are printed and done right affects the immersive mix. So I don't know if anybody wants to touch on this.
Yeah,
No?
I drew the drawing. So, again, we're on the console, and just straight up modern revisionist mixing as the era that we live in nowadays. Once you've got the stems back in the computer, you want to be able to take advantage of all of those things, and so properly keying anything that you've got on the two bus, and so that it's replicated in the stems themselves is crucial to getting the stems to sound even remotely like the original mix. And so just really quickly, it's a simple process of just making sure you grab a copy of the mix pre two bus compressor and then feeding that into the side chain of your two bus compressor before you start printing the stems. That way you're getting the proper amount of compression on every single channel. I always have conversations with people who are like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And then they sit in the studio and they hear that it does work. And so, for me, I think that you do have to then think kind of forward thinking that you're going to use a two bus compressor that has a sidechain input. Not all of them do. There's other considerations in the box with Pro Tools only having mono sidechain inputs. That's got to be considered as well. But generally, this process does really work and preserves single style compression across the mix, not like multi ozone or anything like that, in a repeatable way.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Thank you. All right, next page. This kind of goes through the setup process for that. There is one note here that I want to make. I don't know if it's in this section. This is made on the tubes. Yeah, keep moving on. In printing stems for different things, especially immersive, you have to keep it in mind that if a plugin has an analog switch on it, it's going to add noise. And if you're printing 36 tracks of stems with that analog switch on, you're going to end up with a really noisy immersive mix if that's where your stems are going. So there's certain considerations that you need to look at on your stem printing. From even some of the stereo width plugins can cause issues in immersive. So there's a lot of considerations there to hit on that.
Hey, quick question. We had somebody ask, can we have an official definition of stems? What would you say?
Sure.
To that?
I love that question.
Yeah, great. To me, that is a single track or grouping of tracks that is part of your mix that you can print in a singular form. So that can be as granular as every single track, kick, snare, toms, overheads, background vocals, bass, guitars, keys, 808s, or it can be all drums, keyboards, groupings, however you see fit to group and export any set of tracks that later on, when you put into a new session and all your faders are at 0, should equate to the same thing as your printed mix. I know it takes a really long time, so I don't think stems is another name for tracks. Stems is another name for mixed parts of the track. I think you could say a track is what comes in from the multi-track. Stem is what comes out of the desk or your DAW mixer as you're working. If that makes sense. Hopefully that works. Yeah, multi-track and stem has become so confused. And literally I had somebody said, I'm sending you stems this morning, and they mean a multi-track. For me, stems is output of the mix. Faders at 0 equals your mix. Everything else is a multi-track set. But I would recommend being as granular as possible here, guys. It's going to save you time to group all the drums and group all the keys and group all the background vocals. But if and when an immersive mix comes down the line, you're going to be reprinting all your damn stems, and you're going to be really upset, and no one's going to want to pay for it or the immersive mix is going to be crap because there's no way to actually do anything. So just honestly, even on like a 200 channel mix, this is a 90-minute, 2-hour tops job. And it's imperative for archiving later on and giving yourself the flexibility that you need to be able to do a proper immersive mix. So invest the time. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's great. So multi-track again, considerations, naming conventions. The same if you're labeling the tracks in for multi-track delivery, if they're consolidated tracks, it's good to have a 1, 2, 3, 4 in the order you want them to import into a DAW later, if that makes sense. So if it's kick, snare, hat, whatever, 1, 2, 3, when they import them into any DAW, it's going to order them in that same order. So that's just a kind of a hack to use. Next page. Again, what gets delivered? Okay.
I'd like to jump in. As far
Yes,
as, sending files to people, because that's how a lot of us work now. We work remotely, we create and we send to somebody else. I like to keep in mind that you may not know the person that you're sending files to, whether multi-tracks or stems. Label things and organize them in a way that a stranger who has no idea what you're working on can see and understand what you've done. They may not be able to call you 5 years from now and say, hey, remember that thing? What did you do on the tom track there? You'll never remember, but if you label appropriately, then the stranger can figure it out and not have to track you down later on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next page. So now we get into immersive delivery. So there's a lot that goes into immersive delivery. It's going to vary from depending on which format you're working in, Dolby, Sony, etc., RO3D. So let's move on through this, and I want to get some of the panel involved in talking about this. There's some considerations here that I think maybe you guys want to speak to. The LFE being one of the big things, because delivery requirements for labels and delivery and what the streaming services accept as well, and what they do to the LFE and some things.
George, you want to jump on this one? Or I can.
Actually, I would like to talk about this because the possibilities continue to broaden. Fraunhofer now has developed a cross conversion to go from MPEG-H, no, correct me if I'm wrong, MPEG-4 to Atmos, including steering. And it's a moving target, but I think it's important that we all stay in touch with the progress of the business, to know what we're mixing in and to keep track of where it's going. I think is what we tried to do, what we tried to nail down. ADMs were tough when it was a closed, more of a closed standard. I see Pat Krause is online, and we really appreciate the help from Universal, and from Dolby to try to make this real. But I think we want you to check back in with us and see what the new possibilities are. RO has, in 2.0, for instance, and then I'll shut up, has a very good new toolbox to do not only all of the RO formats, but also to convert RO 3D to ADM, or ADM compliant files. So I hope I haven't left anybody behind there.
Yeah, there's a lot in immersive that, and like I say, the different formats vary, and we've addressed some of the things here, through considerations and things in the different formats to try to give everyone a base a foundation to work from in this. Would anybody else like to speak to any of these considerations?
Yeah, did we touch on the LFE? Sorry, I was typing a definition into for Barry. Jeff, did we touch
Yeah,
on that or no?
Go ahead and
Yeah.
throw what you want.
Yeah, so the LFE channel, I think it's important to remember here, as it says right there, LFE is a full range channel. So if you are you're recording into the renderer is going to kick that out to your LFE, which inherently, because it's an LFE, likely is filtered. It's not a full range speaker; it's a bass management speaker, but it is passing full range information across to that, and that's all well and good until you get onto a system and where that channel might not be inherently bandpathed because of the nature of the speaker. I don't have any around here, but Bluetooth speakers or things like that are folding the LFE in certain formats. It's going to be extremely problematic, and all of a sudden you've just got a giant mess that's translating your fold down. So inherently, best practices, you want to filter your LFE. You want to pick how that is filtered. You want control over it, and you want to decide the information that's going to that speaker. Now, furthermore, Apple has decided that you will filter your LFE or they won't play your music. Then now this is beyond a matter of taste. This is the spatial law of the land. Don't get your music kicked back to you from your distributor or get that emergency call from the client because you failed to filter your LFE and now they've missed their release deadline or whatever it is. No one wants that call. So filter your LFEs. I think that it's right there. Service 120 seems to be a good place. I think it's also worth checking the bottom side on a mix by mix basis and taking the 5 and 10 off. Sometimes I find that to be a good thing. Other times, no. So, you should check it out on a case by case basis.
Yeah. And some of the content owners, they don't want anything above 600 Hertz. They want it dead,
Right.
It depends on where you're delivering. There's a lot of things you need to check when you're delivering immersive.
Yeah. 120, if you were to go to 120, you're safe pretty much across the board in terms of places that would potentially reject your master, but you can go higher, I think, on a taste basis.
Yeah, and even at 600 Hertz, I'm more speaking to something that's 90 dB down and still gets
Yeah.
flagged.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it needs to be
Crazy.
It's important to reiterate this throughout this conversation that when you're doing a serious release that might find its way to several different channels or delivery channels, you really need to listen to it on these different formats. You need to listen to binaural if there's a possibility that it would be folded down to binaural. You need to listen on a sound bar. You'll need to listen on speakers. You'll need to listen on some of these modern headphone systems like a Sony VME 360, just to see what your mix is really doing on alternate systems. And speaking of the roll-off, it's important to realize that these are generally fairly sharp curves, which means that depending on, you touched on this from a minute ago, which means that at some frequency, it's going to cancel. It doesn't necessarily always add. And it gets more critical as you move up in frequency, more hearable as you move up in frequency.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I do want to mention in this, I saw one of the questions. Yes, we do coordinate with AES on this paper, and we've went to labels. We've went to a lot of different people, obviously Dolby and some of the companies that have this, and we want to make sure that we harmonize with everybody, as well as make sure things that our community feels is good feedback for companies, that we also give them feedback from our perspective as users. So anyway, just wanted to touch on that. Let's move on. So again, so we break this out into Dolby Atmos delivery recommendations and naming conventions. Let me just touch on these. As you can see, it's artist initials, track number, song title, mixer initials, revision number, approved Atmos mix. So something that lets the person down the line know that this mix was approved. This is the one that's going out. You can have master revision 1, 2, 3, 4, but the final approved version, we want to make sure that's notated in there. If it's an ADM file, that's important, because It's just a .wav file, and it's important for the mastering engineer or someone down the line to know what it is. Format is actually, this was a new one that we added, and we felt it necessary to put in something, whether it's a 712, 714, 916 configuration that that helps the mastering engineer know what they're pulling up and stuff, and then sample rate and bit depth. Does anybody want to comment on any of that? No? So let's move on. We got pictures in the document too. You can go through and look at all the pictures first and then go back and read it. Next page.
So many objects.
So many objects. This is what gets delivered. There's a few changes that were a couple of subtle changes, should I say, in this. I think the Dolby DAMP file is now called a different name. Maureen, do you remember what that was? We had a conversation with Dolby, so a couple of little tweaks that we're going to make before we send this out.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember what the change
Yeah.
was to, but shortly, as soon as we collect any other comments, we'll be just putting out any errors or anything that we need to fix. It'll be up online to replace this one.
And this hits the recommended levels again, just kind of what the requirements of Dolby and the content owners and the streaming services require. Scrolling on.
You know what? It's worth mentioning that if you do deliver a super hot mix, you would want to expect whoever's processing the mix downstream is dial it back into something reasonable. So we really strongly recommend stick to -18, stick to -14, stick to something consistent, and don't try to burn the buses on your mix.
Yeah, it's
Especially in Atmos.
yeah, it doesn't translate
Especially
well
in
when it
Atmos.
gets real hot. Your MP4 will sound pretty not as good. Yeah, not as good. And
Again,
you
I
get
wanna-
rejected by Apple.
Yeah, there you go. I was going to say we should note. Well, actually, it's not even Apple. More so, it's the labels that aren't even going to send it in. First, you got to get through that gatekeeper before you can even try to get rejected by Apple. So, like, Universal's kicking it back if it's not the right
Yeah.
numbers. And again, nobody wants that call from the artist at midnight the day before the release, pissed because their release isn't going live tomorrow because you were off on your delivery level.
That's
So
right.
18 -1 will get you through the gate. And I think that's a good thing about this document is that these are safe places, right? 18 -1 will get you through the door almost everywhere. 14, not so much, but it's still going to sound fine. But UMG would kick that back. So 18 -1, you're safe.
And Apple will too now.
Yeah, and Apple now too. But I think it is also important to note. Look, we got DAMP is a term in here that's no longer relevant. This Atmos stuff is changing with the wind very, very quickly in real time, and there's just real no good way to make sure that every term and number and level in this document is going to be exactly so. Reiterate what George said earlier and what Jeff has said. Check with your delivery team. Check with who you're sending things into. Check that they all have large sheets of rules in which they want their files submitted. Know that this is a safe place, but check what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, great. All right, next page. So we're diving into we've got Sony 360 in here. I don't know if anybody wants to touch on that.
We should mention that there are very few deliveries actually being requested from labels, in particular Sony, for music in RA360. There are some game deliveries that are still done in RA360, and I think Ryan Hewitt had mentioned that he was anticipating, and Eric Schilling had mentioned that he was anticipating a game delivery. Michael, you're listening to this, so if you know anything more about what you and Eric are doing, it'd be great to hear you chime in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was just going to say,
After you-
for those reasons, we've left 360 in the document, because it is still being used some. Scrolling on. And RO3D and static speaker rendering. This RO3D is a static speaker rendering, and I don't know if somebody wants to speak to this, but this pretty much covers everything else as a speaker rendering delivery. And maybe we need to explain what a speaker rendering delivery
Well,
is.
we divide the two formats into channel-based and object-based. Object-based generally means that in the view of Dolby and some others, that you can assign positions in between speakers, and that becomes an object that can be panned or moved or whatever nonsense you can dream. Channel-based is pretty much a speaker per channel, and there's some pretty strong adherence to that format, in particular 2L Records, Morton Lindbergh of 2L, and your friend Elliot Shiner. It's an offline discussion to have, but going between the two is not always simple and requires some math and some processing. And I think we're seeing that come online. As I mentioned, RO3D does it, and there is an MPEG-4 format that it'll do that as well, to go between these two general formats. And I have to add one thing, just because I can't keep my mouth shut, is that Atmos is a theater format. It's so that you can put speakers in any number of different venues and be able to interpret, and they would be able to interpret your object-based mix to hit certain positions in your sound field. But that's the whole rationale behind object-based versus channel-based.
All right, thanks, George. Let's go to the next page. So just some more as we get into folder hierarchy, recommendations, and naming conventions. We just thought a graphic would kind of help explain this, as it would be, as you would see it like on a Mac desktop. So,
Jeff, I don't think we touched on this, and I think it's important to say, you can see in this picture in the delivery for Dolby Atmos, we're including a 714 ADM binaural MP4 and stereo. 714 is the discrete channel output of the Atmos mix. We have to live in a world where we cannot assume that Atmos as a format will exist forever. And so if you only have the ADM, you could find yourself in a situation 20 years from now where that file is nonsensical and not openable. But a discrete channel 714 mix will always open and always play as long as you aim those tracks at the right speakers in the method that you intended it to sound. So make sure that you are also doing your discrete channel, whatever you choose to do, 916, 714, whatever it is that you mixed in and what your intention was of the mix. Make sure that you lock that in with the discrete stem.
And we strongly recommend that you listen to it, because 714 is going to be the format that goes to the archives at the Library of Congress, among other things, and to various labels archives. So that, for the moment, is our reference archive, because it's, to do otherwise it'd be chaos. We can't archive every format at this point in time.
yeah, that's a great point. All right, next page. And so, who wants to talk about this? Scroll on to the next page. This is sort of the speaker rendering chart that we came up with, and I don't know if anybody wants to kind of speak to that, because every seems like every company has a different way of labeling each speaker, and we did that chart to sort of help you cross-reference what was what when you're comparing formats. All right, next page.
When in doubt, include more information in the name of the track.
That's it. We talk, metadata is really important to us, and I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that, Leslie or anybody, but it's a really important part of delivery, and it's just really important in due diligence down through the whole chain of delivery and dissemination. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that.
I just say, if we don't get it right from the beginning, it has to go to so many places that it's almost impossible to get it right in the end. So it's just a major part of the project has to be to document the metadata, who did what, when, where, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely been something that the P&E wing has been very involved in over the years, because it has to do with crediting and the end of the line, getting credits up. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to credits and some of the progress that's been made there, Maureen.
Well, Apple is I think many people may know, Apple is trying to show full credits. They're putting up everything that they get, and they're not getting everything. How's that? So the supply chain is not functioning as we hope it will eventually function. But it starts at the beginning. Someone's got to collect the metadata on the project and document it. I mean, in the past, we would say the producer does this, right? This is the producer's job. They signed a contract that said they were going to deliver this information, but things are not quite that simple anymore. So someone on your project has to manage the crediting and metadata, who did what, when, and where. So otherwise, it just will not make it down the line. People won't get paid properly. People won't get recognized properly. And that's not right. Everybody who contributed to a project needs to be credited. And well, you can decide that. You can decide whether it should be everybody, or that is what would traditionally have been a producer's job. But whoever is in charge of the project needs to have this information and pass it forward.
Yeah, very important. It's your business card too. So what should we do at this point? I don't want to run out of time if we have some questions from everyone. And do we want to go to questions?
Maybe just show the next page of the metadata collection
Oh,
page,
yeah.
the page. Yeah. These are the things.
Scroll on. Yeah.
Oop, the next one. That one. So there is a checklist included in the recommendations, and that's it.
Yeah, this is a basic set
Yeah.
of metadata. There's how many categories, Maureen? 200 and something?
Oh, yeah, it could be all, yes, but this is basic.
This will get you covered.
Yeah.
Scroll on. Let's see if there's anything else. We get into just some more explanation of some details to clarify some of the terms and abbreviations being used. Scroll on. Yeah. So I think at this point, well, yeah, let's next.
We should get to
hit the
folder hierarchy. Yeah, exactly.
Let's hit that. Scroll on down. So does anybody want to speak to this? Just explain a little bit about the folder hierarchy.
It's really helpful.
Yeah, Paul or Leslie, you want to jump
You
on
don't
this one?
have to use this. You don't have to use this particular format, but this will make your life easier.
This was basically a great starting point. Everybody customizes this a little bit. I do. Everybody else, this was a lot of discussion went into this and thought, and how we laid this out. But this is a good building block for you. And whether you're organizing stuff as a working folder hierarchy on your drive to work from, or what you're delivering even, this gives you a good foundation for that. So we feel real strong that this is important in your workflow, and it was very important to us to include this in the document.
Yeah, I mean, this stems from naming conventions almost. You have to assume that that there might be someone looking for something that doesn't know where to find it. So it needs to be very clear where to find what you need. If there's not an engineer looking for a mix, then they don't need to go digging through files that aren't labeled mixes to find mixes. It needs to be really clear where things are.
Yeah. And, this goes for songwriters, everybody organizing your files. I mean, you could write a song, and 5 years from now, somebody could call and say, I want to put this in a TV show, a movie, a video game or something, and I want your original files. If you can't find them, you can't make money. So this is really, really important stuff.
Yeah, I've recently had, in the past couple of months, maybe 3 or 4 different clients reach out to me about projects that we did 5, 6 years ago and say, hey, can we go back to this? Can we finish that? And I've had to go back to a lot of these archives to find things, and they were not as organized as they were on this graph here. But the idea of being able to do things quickly and efficiently, that's what brings the money in. If I couldn't go back and find those projects and understand what I'd done 6 years ago, I couldn't have completed them now, and that's money that's just literally out the door that I can't bring back in. So again, being organized, the repeatability, and just having a system, whatever it is, if you tweak these folders, you don't have to do exactly this, but whatever makes sense to you and is easy to find at a glance. I have lots of things in my head, and I'm like, oh, I'll remember that down the line. I never remember it down the line. I never ever remember it down the line. So if it's clear and I can look at it and get a full picture, then I can be successful with it.
Easy
Yeah,
to remember it a couple months later or even a year or two later, but when it's 10 years later, not so easy. And be it immersive, or I had a project that we had to go back and we're using some songs for a musical theater thing that needed stems. They went back, this predates me printing stems. This is 15, 17-year-old stuff. And not only was it a hardship to just get the sessions to open and play back properly, but finding everything and finding all the assets and things that I needed to do, the different type of remixes that were required for the theater project. And the whole project was banking on these things, these assets being able to be created. And it was either figure out how to get it from the mix or restart it from scratch. And it was way easier to get it right the mix. But I had to do a forensic deep dive on files before I started using a folder hierarchy, which has been 10 years now. The 10 years that I've been using it, everything is very easy to find. The era before that, it's like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade to find anything I need. So
well, let's scroll on down just a hair more. So, and keep going. We get into some of the short-term, long-term backup parts of this. This document, we don't take a real deep dive into long-term archival, but it's a very important part of this document, and we feel like the document is foundational for short and long-term archival. So we've included some of this. Is there anything else anybody would like to touch on within the document that's on the panel?
I saw something just in the chat quickly. Matt's responding to it, but it's an interesting thing. We touched on it about whose responsibility it is to archive and to keep track of things. And generally, it may be someone else's responsibility, but I often save the day by having things myself. And, you can pass the buck, but my clients all look at me and like, oh man, Willie Green has everything I need. I can go back to this old thing. And that keeps them coming back. And especially, I do a lot of independent records. Generally, all respect to my clients, I'm the most organized person in the room, right? And that's what makes me valuable to my clients. Everybody has gear and mics and speakers, but I have an organization philosophy that allows me to take care of things for my clients, and that makes me more valuable to them. So even if it's somebody else's responsibility, in that case, you're the backup system by having these things intact.
I would
sorry, Graham, I misread you the first time. My bad.
To piggyback on the thing about passing the buck, the same thing goes with credits. Like it's somebody else's job always, but it should be your job to take down all of the credits and metadata.
I don't think I've heard this.
Go ahead, George.
I don't think I've heard this one thing, is that if you're working on a project, you need to have your current data set updated every time you work on it, and have it in 3 places. Have it in 3 places. If you've got it in 3 places, you own it. If you have it in 2 places, you're just borrowing it. If you only have it in 1 place, you're giving it away. You gotta have your data in 3 places. One of which should be not in the same place as the others, should be downtown at your your managers, your group's manager's business, have a copy there to really, to anticipate that you're gonna someday lose a drive. And it's gonna happen more now with SSDs as we find out how unreliable SSDs are. There are people that are trying to qualify SSDs. They're doing a good job, but we don't have enough time with them yet. You just got to anticipate that you're going to lose a disk or two.
And so
Always.
by that, you would recommend one of the places be in the cloud. Is that right?
Absolutely. As we come to understand the cost of doing it ourselves, to do it properly ourselves, to maybe get an LTO drive, that's $10,000 every couple of years, getting a new LTO that keeps track of the LTO recommendation specifications. So maybe the cloud's not such a bad idea. When you look at long term, you'll look at AWS Glacier, and it's not bad if you're just pulling something down in emergencies. If you pull something down every day, it gets very expensive. It's also got a latency built into it. But it's very reliable. AWS is very reliable. 24 plus servers around the world. No, it's more than that. They're going to be able to replicate data like nobody else can.
I think it's an important thing to touch on here as we talk about all this, like the load that puts on a studio owner, a mix engineer, or a person to be everybody's archival site. I function in the same manner that Paul does. Like, I always have the files. I have everything still, and it comes at a great financial cost to me to keep everything and keep it up to date and keep it in 3 places, because I agree with George wholeheartedly on that one. But again, when an artist gets signed 6 years later, and they need not only in order to get their full deal money, they need all of the things, which is the original multi-tracks, the consolidated multi-tracks, the stems, all the mix prints, the unmastered mix, and for everything that they don't turn in, they get less money. Do you want to be the one that saves the day and has all the stuff, right? Like, and so and again, if there's 3 drives and they only had 1 and they lost it, you can be the backup there. It's a tough thing to figure out, right?
Well,
Across 25 years,
predict.
how do you how do you decide what stays, what's worth paying to back up? We work at this point now, having gotten to this place 25 years later, of like 50 terabytes of data laying around, and the cost to keep that backed up, which is insane. Like, we're now talking to clients on a project by project basis from the beginning about what the long-term storage is going to look like, and we're building in cost at the beginning. And if they say like, hey, look, we're recommending cloud being one of your long-term storage options, and they don't want to deal with it, they don't want to understand it, then we say, that's cool. This project is this amount of data, and we know to store it for 10 years is going to cost this much. Just give us the money and we'll store it. And we're taking care of that. We're administrating it. It's on our AWS, or it's on Backblaze, or wherever it is. And we just get a small amount of money from them up front to pay for the storage fees. I've never had a single artist push back on that. They're all been grateful to give you that couple $100 to know that their files are safe in the cloud. So
that's right.
Every single one of us needs to figure this out. We are not the Library of Congress, but we also need to ensure that this data is preserved, archived properly, and persists as someone's art legacy. So it's important to think about.
And it's not a big chance that your small artist will strike it rich, but just consider how much the Queen catalog just sold to Sony for. Everybody knows about that. $2.4 billion. That's billion. That's 9 zeros. That's a lot of dough. It's worth taking that chance. That one of the things that you work on, if you consistently have a plan to do backups, you're going to use that. You will use that. Some bands, some artists, some writers, some company, some label will be grateful that you have that.
It's
Yeah.
shocking the number of times from major labels I've been asked for the multi-track 10 years later. Like, yo, you were supposed to archive this, Warner. You were supposed to archive this, Atlantic. How come you don't have it? Oh, we can't find it.
Yeah.
So
And it's always
Maureen,
the thing that you
Maureen,
didn't back
Yeah.
up or forgot that someone will ask for.
Maureen, do you want to talk a little bit
Exactly,
about
Paul.
third-party storage facilities? Do you want to talk about your experience at Iron Mountain in Boyer?
Well, yes. I mean, there are companies that have fabulous systems for storing and archiving and retrieving that are very safe. And that's what a lot of the labels ultimately end up using. It is not inexpensive, but it is safe. So I'm not sure what else to say, George, except that they do incredible work on restoring and just taking care of what they're charged with, with the tapes, the hard drives, everything that they're charged with. I'm also looking at Rowie here, put in a small point. This is so someone that at a label, right? That small point renumbering start with 01 or 001 if heavy track count.
Oh, yeah.
a real world point.
Jeez. If that isn't peak 2024, I don't really know. 001. How long do we have to do 0001?
Wow. Are we at the last page?
Pretty close.
All right.
Yeah, somebody had a question about hard drives and SSD and stuff. I think George touched on.
So we mentioned this before, that to really understand the structure, the internal structure of an SSD is enough to make you not store anything on an SSD of any value. It's not a well understood, much less rigorous failure mechanism right now. And because it's very hard to stress test for a 20-year predicted future, they simply don't talk about it yet. But we all have SSD failure stories. And it's worth just getting at least one or two spinning rust drives and putting it on an old spinning rust drive. They're getting really cheap.
Great. I think from here it gets into the appendix and glossary and stuff. This is all just for your information in case there's terms you don't understand. We've included most terms and what they are back here. In the appendix, we touch on things in a little more depth that we touched on in the document, and they're all important things. We moved it to the appendix just not, if you want to go deep, you can go deep. So that's pretty much the document. I want to make sure, have we posted a link in the chat for the document, download link? We have? Okay. You can just keep scrolling through it if you want, Candace. And anything else anybody wants to add?
Where will this document live? Once, I know there's maybe like one more tiny revision, but outside of this, where can people find this?
It's on the Producers and Engineers Wing site,
Love it.
which is under membership at the Recording Academy. Usually you can also have a shortcut to the Producers and Engineers Wing, which is Producers and A&D, not the ampersand like in our legal name, but Producers and Engineers.com. Unless something is malfunctioning, will take you to the page. It will take you to our site.
Definitely a document I feel like we're all going to want to download and
Yeah, and River
spend
just
a lot
put
of time with.
River just put in the chat here the direct link.
Perfect.
No, I would only just commend, like I did at the beginning, the work of everybody here and how much knowledge is in these groups of people that work together, and how much caring and experience, and it's just so valuable, and it's so valuable to share, with our community. And that's what we try to do, is bring people together because there aren't very many people in the world that have this esoteric knowledge, right? It's this group of people, and I don't mean just the group of people on the page, on our screen. I mean this group of people who do engineering and production for making records. It's a calling and a craft. And you're an amazing group of people, and you learn from each other, and have traditionally learned from each other, but still continue to learn from each other all the time. And just so grateful that you are a community and share that information. It's why we exist, is so that we can get people around the country and around the world now talking together about making music and the technical aspects of it, how to keep the bar high, right? How to keep the bar high. So everybody
preserving
here is, keep the bar high and preserve it when you get it there. Thank you, everyone who came and sat in, and the people on the screen. Thank you, River. Thank you, Candace, who put this together. I hope it's helpful, and more to come.
That's right.
To that end, I'd like to add that there are forum presentations, webcasts like this occurring on a fairly regular basis. Although there's not a calendar for these things to look at what's coming next, you can go to the YouTube page for the Producers and Engineers Wing and look at some of the forum presentations that we've recorded in the past. And I think earlier on, Candace posted a link in the chat. So if you want to see this at some point, go to that YouTube page. If you want to see some of the other topics we've discussed, go to the YouTube page.
Barry's asking if he can post a copy of the delivery recommendations at his own website. And I think the answer is certainly yes. Of course, just let them know where it came from.
Yeah, think about these conversations are so important at a time in the industry and history and recorded music, about what a wide chasm and what a gap and a long stretch we have between what's happening in immersive and AI and analog tape, and we're doing all of them right now. And that sort of generational knowledge, when we're not all in studios together working every day, everybody's in their own space, it's really hard sometimes to connect like this. So I'm so thankful for this forum and this group for doing this work, and keeping us all going.
And thanks to everybody who showed up for it. That's it. And